things we were talking about before, we didn't have a chance to talk about it on the last show, is that there are people who figure what you do is so premeditated that you have to almost have a script up there. I mean, for one of the things that always amazed me is you're telling a story while the game, as a pitch goes down low, and the old wise man, and the game is going on, and you get the pitches going in, and it's always punctuated, it seems like, with a home run. I don't know how you do it.
No, I wish, but no. There's no premeditation, though, in all honesty. You go to the ballpark, and something happens. People might say, gee, you really have a terrific memory. I don't have a terrific memory, because I don't really know what I have memorized. But something happens on the field, and it triggers a response sometimes. And then I'll say, gee, that reminds me, but I couldn't have thought about it otherwise.
We're going to, in a little bit, talk about faux pas that even you have made.
Oh, sure.
And there have been many. But before we do that, I want you to tell the folks the story of Gordon McClendon, the broadcaster who, he may even be in the Hall of Fame. He was certainly an armed forces announcer. He was a great announcer.
He was.
And he did the broadcast of the Giants and the Dodgers, the Bobby Thompson home run. But this is a game that, I guess they're playing the Boston Braves in 1950 against the Dodgers. Tell the folks what happened. This is a nightmare, folks.
Well, this is probably as deep into the soup as you can get. It was the bottom of the ninth inning. The score was tied, and there was one out, and the Braves had a runner at third. And Gordon, I assume, was off by himself. He was not where he could get any help. And the Braves hitter hit a fly ball. The Dodger outfielder caught it. The winning run tagged up and scored, and the game was over.
Game's over, right.
But he thought that was the third out, and that the score was tied. He went into commercial, and now the crowd is walking across the field, and he comes out of commercial, and he said, oh, they're doing a very nice thing. They're allowing the people in the bleachers to sit in the grandstand for the extra innings. And now he's waiting for players, and he's waiting for something, and nothing happens. Now he's really in trouble, and he said, you know what I think happened? I'll be darned, they had a curfew on the game, and the Dodgers have a train to catch, which they did in those days. And so he went off the air with a tie game, even though the Braves had won the game. And he came into the press room, and we were all sitting waiting to get on the train. And he said, what happened? You guys had a curfew? And we were as confused. What do you mean? Well, he said, how come the game didn't finish? And we said, well, it did finish. And then we explained, and he thought, oh my gosh, I thought there were two outs. Only one.
That long he would wait.
He just went on and on and on and on. The next day, to his credit, he came on, and he said, hi, this is Gordon McClendon, the old Scotsman. I guess you didn't expect me back today after what happened yesterday. But he said, Daddy owns the network. And I got away with it.
And he did, too.
And he did, and so he did.
The most moving, I think, moment was not a moment of action on the field, even though it was a movement on the field, but it was the time Campy returned to the Coliseum, and it was a dramatic moment. We're going to take a short clip from that and reflect on this great moment about 30 years ago.
Perhaps the most beautiful and dramatic moment in the history of sports. Let there be a prayer for every life. And wherever you are, maybe you, in silent tribute to Campanella, can also say a prayer for his well-being.
I think they use the phrase, a blizzard of butterflies or fireflies dancing in the night. I mean, that's almost a moment that's so poetic that if it hadn't been on radio, words wouldn't have applied particularly.
It was the first time I had ever seen anything like that. I had never seen a tribute to a player where this vast football stadium was suddenly darkened and the lights went on, the matches. And I guess, again, you go back to your own being and my education, and in listening to it now, the words that I used, I said, let there be a prayer for every life, because I've always been very much involved in my religion. So what happens is, when you get into those particular moments, that's when a little more of you is shown than usually shown.
1955, we talked about this in the last show, but this was a moment, the 55 championship, 7 games. 1955 is the year the Geneva Conference, the honeymooners went off the air, Davy Crockett hats, but for you it was your milestone because it was your first championship, and it was an emotional moment because in the final out you said, ladies and gentlemen, the Brooklyn Dodgers are the champions of the world, and it really got to you. We're going to take a look at that moment for you. We don't have to say anything, but we can talk about what it was like, the 55 Dodgers.
Well, first of all, you have to remember I started with them in 1950. Basically, most of the same players were still there. So I had gone through all of their times with them, losing in 1950 in the 10th inning of the final day of the season to the Phillies. 1951, losing to Bobby Thompson's home run. 1952, losing the World Series. 1953, losing the World Series. 1954, watching the Giants win the World Series. So I really understood how these fellows were feeling. And that series in 55, they lost the first 2 games. So the feeling immediately was, here they go again. But they rallied back, and now it's come to the 7th game. A 22-year-old kid is pitching, Johnny Padres, in Yankee Stadium, where they never did very well anyway. And so you kind of went in there thinking, well, now be prepared to lose. I hope these fellows understand. Well, when they won, and you looked down and saw them, you understood exactly how they felt. You understood their frustration. You understood their tears of joy. It was over. All the pressure that they were a choke team, that, yeah, you could win the pennant, but you can't win the series. All of it was gone. There was relief involved as well. It was a magnificent moment. It really was.
Vin, you know, when you take a look back, I think Roger Kahn had it in Boys of Summer. He said the Brooklyn Dodgers were not always the best team. They were outspoken, they were opinionated, they were bigoted, they were understanding, they were black, they were white, they were extreme men. Can you, in a paragraph or so, describe why the Brooklyn Dodgers were such an important team on the American psyche?
First of all, they arrived on the scene after the war. Most of them came from the service and the Dodger farm system. And there was that great euphoria, the war is over, and now this team began to play as a unit together. And it was a white team and a black team. And that was very important. Jackie's arrival was monumental to the game and to the country. So it was a team with nicknames that really stuck to the ribs. And all of that, plus the fact they were excellent players. And it was a very colorful team, and it captured the imagination. It would have been on national television, it would have been the America's team.
It would have been a mini-series, too. Maybe it still will be someday.
Right.
We'll come back more with the great Vin Scully after this.
And I'd like to conclude with a story. There is a legend in the West of an Indian chief who was wont to test the manhood of his young braves by making them climb up the side of a mountain as far as they could in a single day. And at daybreak on the appointed day, 4 braves left the village. The first one came back in the late afternoon with a sprig of spruce to show how high he had climbed. Later that afternoon, another came with a branch of pine, and much later in the day, the third came with an alpine shrub. But it wasn't until late that night, by a full moon with the stars dancing in the heavens, that the 4th brave arrived. "What did you bring back? How high did you climb?" asked the chief. And the brave said, "Where I was, there was no spruce nor pine to shield me from the sun. There was no flower to cheer my path. There was only snow and ice and barren rocks and cold, hard ground. My feet are torn and bloodied. I'm worn out and exhausted. I'm barehanded, and I have come home late." But, and then a wondrous look came into his eye, and he said, "I saw the sea." For 33 years, the good Lord has allowed me to do what I've always wanted to do, broadcast my favorite game. He has allowed me to climb my mountain. And today, thanks to the Ford C. Frick Award, I thank you for sharing this moment with me, because believe me, today, I saw the sea. Thank you.
Whew, that's a moment that you almost can't plan. It sounded like you wrote that out, but you didn't at the Hall of Fame induction because you said you couldn't.
I couldn't really get a handle on it. I thought about it constantly from January until August of that year. The only thing I did have, the skeleton, was the Indian story, because it pretty much summed up. And again, I went deep within myself, and I began it by saying most of us, in fact all of us I'm sure, when things go badly, our first reaction is, why me? Why me? And then I thought, why don't I have the same reaction when something great has happened? And that was the thought that I had. Why me? Why this redheaded kid with his shirt tail hanging out is suddenly being brought into the Hall of Fame? Why me? Why not somebody else? And that was the idea that I held on to throughout that rather long speech.
I saw the sea for you means so much, and so much has been given you, afforded you, and also so much has cost you too in your career. And I'm not going to get deeply personal because these are personal issues, but you lost your wife, and you had to come back from a devastatingly difficult time in 1972, I think it was. You had to bring up 3 children by yourself then you remarried. When you're in the depths of despair like that, and the feelings, and it would be normal, the feelings of guilt or whatever, the travel, the distance that you apply to your family, how you can bounce back from that, because so many other people can relate to what they have to go through day to day.
I would think my faith, my religion was tremendous strength. My work. I think all of us, when we are faced with tragedy, hurl ourselves, immerse ourselves in our work. And if you happen to love your work, it makes the immersion a little easier. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Sandy, and that saved everything.
At any point, though, did you say, maybe I have denied my family too much, maybe I should hang it up, or pull back,
sure.
or come home?
I have, I've lived with that ever since I first married. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought it's as if, and I hate to say this unless you understand what I'm saying, but it's the only thing I can do. And so I think it's almost God's will that I do it. There's not very much else that I know how to do now.
I'll talk about the critics for a few moments. Over the years, Scully is too flowery, Scully is pedantic, he is indulgent, at times even patronizing. Any of that stuff to you strike you as even valid anywhere? Is there some criticism that you think that might ring true in any of that stuff?
Oh, sure. I think the longer you're in the business and the more you do, you're going to get plaudits and you're going to get criticism. The only time I never remember the compliments, and I think that's probably human nature. I mean, someone says, boy, you did a great game, and you say, well, that's, thanks. Then you go on. Somebody said, boy, he just called you. That'll stay, oh my gosh, you know. But what you have to do is you have to get back to the bottom line. I prepared the best I could. I was as honest as I could. I did not have anything that I was going to force upon the scene. And I did not want to get in the way of the event. And then if you can get through all of that, then you might say, okay, now maybe I was too flowery, too pedantic. Maybe I'll have to watch that next time.
I remember the Cardinal-Giants series a few years ago. You know where I'm heading with this.
Oh, sure.
And there was a disputed call, a home run versus a double. And
well, it wasn't even a dispute. It was just a bad call on my part.
Yeah, but the reaction, Vin.
Oh,
I mean, they had the governor
Yeah.
of Missouri, I believe
Right,
it was,
that's right.
actually went to the legislature the next day and chastised you. It's amazing.
Well, that's what amazed me. It was an honest mistake. And again, you can only live with your mistakes. If you really feel that you've tried hard and you were honest, if you make a mistake, my gosh, to her is human, you know, without a doubt. What happened was there was a ball hit in the outfield, and it hit the warning track, and it bounced up into the bleachers in St. Louis. I don't know why, but for that split second, I thought the fan had touched it leaning over the wall. We showed it, and really, you saw him here, but in my mind, he leaned over. And I said something about, isn't it a shame, with X number of people in the ballpark, one fan might have changed the outcome of the game. Well, I was wrong, you know. And they got a lot of phone calls that the ball had bounced into the stands, so that he didn't lean over. And I went to bed that night, and the next morning I got a phone call, and it was the governor of Missouri, and I thought it was somebody kidding, you know. And so then I realized, no, they had said it's the governor. He's called 4 times already. Well, what he tried to do, and I think shame on him. I really think shame on him. I made a mistake, and I admitted it. But he tried to take that mistake and use it politically, which was a really cheap shot. I apologized for my mistake, which I hope told the people a little bit about me. If they stopped to think about what the governor did with my mistake, I think it told a lot about him. And a political columnist who happens to be a friend of mine, world famous, and he said, Vin, remember, to err is human. To forgive is divine. To exploit is political.
Well expressed. We'll come back more with Vin Scully after this.
It's 9:46 p.m. 2-2 to Harvey Keene. One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed. A perfect game.
He has called 14 no-hitters and 2 perfect games. He is Vin Scully. I think most people associate you, though, with Sandy for some reason, of all the Dodgers. And I wonder if that's just a perception, a coincidental thing, or you think that there is some validity to the fact that even from a distance there was an affection between the announcer and the player.
Well, I think really what happened, the Dodgers came out here in '59 and won in '59. They came out in '58. But in '63 is when the team really blossomed. And they swept the Yankees in 4, and Koufax became a superstar in '63 and '65 and '66. So as the team captured the imagination of the town, so I think the fellow broadcasting the team's daring do, they began to understand him a little bit too.
When you talk about Sandy, of course, you're talking about a player who played in Brooklyn and in Los Angeles. Jackie Robinson never made it to Los Angeles. I think he was traded to the Giants, the hated Giants of all teams. You have a quick story, though, that synopsis of Jackie Robinson?
Well, the story has to do with our business, broadcasting play-by-play. Jackie was involved in the last out of a game in Ebbets Field, and he was called out, and the Dodgers lost the game. And Jackie was out, but Jackie thought he was safe. And Jackie went in the clubhouse, and I mean, he was tearing up the clubhouse, hurling equipment, slamming the metal locker doors. Now, at the far end of the clubhouse in Ebbets Field was a black pitcher named Dan Bankhead. And in those days, there was a definite pecking order. When you walked in the door of the clubhouse, the stars were right there. And then you started to get away from stardom, and by the back of the room where the Coke machine was, that was where Dan Bankhead was. Now, Dan didn't speak very often, but when he did speak, he had that habit of being right on the money. So Jackie was hollering and hollering and slamming, and all of a sudden, Bankhead, with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose and a towel across his loins, Bankhead said, "Robeson," which is the way he called him, Robeson. "Robeson." And Jackie stopped like that, and the room went quiet. And Bankhead said, and it's been my philosophy ever since, "You's not only wrong, you is loud wrong." And you know when I really thought about that? Well, we just talked about 1987, the ball that bounced into the bleachers. I was loud
and wrong,
and it's
too.
a dreadful place to be.
This is television. We're going to throw names at you, and we're going to ask you to, in a paragraph or less, to come up with some observations. Pee Wee Reese.
The captain. There will have been 1 million captains in the history of the Dodgers. He was number 1, the captain.
Roy.
Mother hen. Used to sit outside the kitchen in Vero Beach and tell stories. And every pitcher and every player on the team loved him.
Brooklyn.
Heart, soul, closeness. The ball club represented the people in Brooklyn more, I think, than any ball club in any other city in America.
We'll come back with Vin Scully and wrap things up in our final segment. He's celebrating his 63rd birthday mid-November. And everybody asks you, how much longer does Vin want to continue to do it? You do it as well or better than most people and in this profession. You ever see yourself saying bye-bye to the Dodgers? Or?
No, I guess not. George Burns is so funny. Somebody said, you know, how long are you going to live? And George Burns said, I just want to be around long enough to see who gets Brooke Shields. I'm not that funny. I don't know how long I'm going to be around, but as long as I want to be around, as long as I get the goosebumps, and I still do.
And this is the toughest thing to do, and it's a cliche, I know, but everyone asks you. When they ask you for the epitaph, when you want to put it down on the tombstone, Vin, what is it that you want people to say?
I haven't really given it much thought, but I guess basically, the best would be he was a good man and a good husband and a good father. That's really all that counts. The rest of it
in the
is,
order of things, announcer's way down the list.
Oh, yeah, announcer doesn't count. No.
Vin, it's been a splendid time having you.
Oh,
Thank
bless
you so much
you.
for
Thank
doing
you,
2
Roy.
programs with us, and it's been a great treat for me, too.
Well, I'm honored and delighted, and it's been fun for me.